This series is on a multitude of ways to make tube socks on all machines, and I believe I've come up with something completely new for you to try today. For these, we're using some tuck stitch and some ribbing. Many of the videos thus far have relied on either ribbing or stretchy additions to the yarn to improve stretch and fit. But those options may not be ideal for every knitter. So let's try adding some tuck stitches to give us the extra room in the heel that we need. One of the challenges of making well-fitted tube socks is that the circumference of the foot may be much, much smaller than the circumference of the same foot measured in the dimensions shown from back of heel to front of ankle, and yet the sock must make that trip. If we put some tuck stitch in that area, the fabric will naturally get wider and change its character quite a bit and should allow the room that is needed. For this design, we'll also shape the toe with graduated ribbing so we get a nicer fit. We will gather the toe off, but using a special method that greatly reduces bunching and bumpiness. I'm going to demonstrate a hung hem, but you can certainly substitute a ribbed top if you would like. What we'll be knitting today will fit an extra small adult, about a lady's 3 to 5, up to a 6 probably. That is the same size range because shoe sizes run oddly, as little girls' sizes 1 to 3. These are US sizes. The sample was knitted on an artisan. It got 13 stitches and 17.8 rows for every 2 inches using DK yarn. It's also known as number 3 yarn in American terminology. Cast on 45 stitches using E-wrap. That's already done by the time you join me. And knit 24 rows at the main stitch size. That's stitch size 6. Work across the bed, hanging each E-wrap on a working needle. Knit 40 plain rows. This completes the sock cuff. Now we're going to do a few rows of tuck stitch. Bring every other needle forward on a manual machine like this one. If you're on the right, as I am, set the carriage levers on the side so that the left one will leave the needles and hold, and the right one on the return trip will knit them back from hold. Then knit 2 rows and repeat the sequence. So we're getting tuck stitch. This is actually the very simplest form of tuck stitch. You may notice me holding the carriage oddly on the second of the 2 rows. That is because my side lever is not behaving quite properly, and I'm having to hold it to keep it from flipping back into the lower position. So that's a project I must address shortly, and you will see it in another video. Here's a shot of the carriage set correctly for this machine. The setting is very similar on Singer Studio's Silver Reed type machines. On hobby mid gauges, set one side to leave the needles and hold, the other side to knit them back. Work the tuck stitch for 28 rows. That's 14 repeats of the 1 row tucks, 1 row knits back pattern. Now return to stockinette settings and knit 40 plain rows. It may interest you to know that I'm still knitting with I-cord substituting for a sponge bar, an experiment I tried about a year ago, and it's still working. I think this is a better do-it-yourself fix for simple machines than for those with automatic patterning, and I will put a link to the video where I tried that and explain how to do it in the program notes for this video. Move every 4th stitch to the ribber. I am using my multi-prong tool here, the one you can adjust, as a every 4th stitch selector, so I know which ones to transfer. We usually transfer with a double eye needle, but I have found that by using this loom hook, I can do the job just fine, and I can keep my hand out of your way so that you can see it going to and fro on the needles better. The stitches going to and fro, that is. When every fourth stitch is transferred, knit 8 rows, leaving the stitch size on the main bed where it is and using stitch size 4 for the river. At this point, we have needles in groups of 3 on the main bed. Take the center stitch from each group of 3, transfer it to the river, and take the empty needles on the main bed out of work. Now set both beds to stitch size 3. Knit 8 more rows, and that will complete the knitting of the sock. Leave a yarn tail more than twice the length of the span of the stitches in work. Thread the tail into a yarn needle or double-eye needle and begin threading it through the stitches on the main bed only. We're going to bind off the knits and purls separately. This is a long yarn tail. It needs to be for us to work, and it could get caught on things easily. So drop the majority of it down between the beds and then work with only the amount you need to pull through. Once the main bed stitches are all on the yarn tail, begin working from the other direction, gathering off the river stitches. You could certainly make life easier on yourself by running around to the other side and sitting on a tall stool so that you could again gather off right to left. I just tried to do it left-handed, and it took me a few tries to get comfortable with it, but in the end I did. It's really not that bad. Here I'm kind of pulling down on the needle that holds the stitch to elongate it a little bit. That helped quite a lot. When finished, drop all the front bed stitches, and then it's only hanging on the back bed needles, and lift it off of those. Here's what the fabric looks like. I have a little snag I'll have to fix later. And now we gather it. In general, gathered toes are bulky and bumpy, not comfortable, and kind of sloppy looking. However, by gathering the knits and the purls separately, the bulk is astonishingly much reduced, and it makes really quite a neat toe. Now secure that gathering so it can't back out, and the yarn tail can be used to seam the edges of the sock together. You may use any flat seam you like that does not consume a column of stitches, but what I'm showing you here is the bars and knots alternating that occur at the edge of machine knitted fabric. The bars are quite long pieces of yarn and loose and easy to work into, but you get a tighter seam if you work into the knots. For socks like these, I whip stitch the knots and the bars together, working up the toes, and then proceed to simply whip stitch the knots together, working up the length of the foot. You see me doing that here, and it produces a nice seam, I think, and it doesn't take as long as some other good seams. The Bickford seam is also good, but over this length, it's more tedious. In this size, the sock will finish to about 7 inches in circumference, which does fit extra small ladies' feet and big girls' feet. But obviously the heel to ankle area has more room, and that helps with the fit. A written pattern for this sock does not exist yet, but it will soon, and I will offer it to Country Knitting of Maine News and Views in 2020. Fellow sock knitters will find plenty of patterns to work with on my website. They're all on the same page, and there's a link to that page in the program notes for this video. And don't miss the other free patterns on this playlist. There's also a link to the playlist in the notes.